Welcome to Bankole's Nation. I'm your host, Bankole Thompson, and thank you so much for joining us. On this week's episode, we have the eminent surgeon, distinguished physician, Dr. Julius Garvey, the last remaining son of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the father of the 20th century Black freedom struggle. Dr. Julius Garvey is here to talk to us about a new book about his father's legacy and the need for President Joe Biden on his way out to grant a posthumous pardon to Marcus Garvey. It's all coming up on this week's episode of Bankole's Nation. Stay with us. Let's bring in the venerable Dr. Julius Garvey, the last remaining son of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the father of the 20th century Black freedom struggle. Dr. Garvey is a surgeon, a scientist, and a distinguished a leader in the field of medicine who has been pushing for the exoneration of Marcus Garvey. He has a new book out titled Justice for Garvey, Look for Me in the Whirlwind, edited by Dr. Julius Garvey. Dr. Garvey, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Bankole. It's indeed a pleasure.
Yes, so I want to begin with the book, though. You have this book out, and the foreword's written by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I'm curious, though, in terms of the premise here of the book, the case that you're making. Can you share with our listeners and our viewers in terms of the case that you're making in this book?
Well, it's you might say two cases. One is the legal case itself, which is insubstantial
Right.
in terms of a conviction and a sentencing, etc. And then the other case is the historical period, and 100 years later, we're reliving that historical period, I think, because we have not found a way forward for the African community living in the United States, as well as Africans abroad. We're still divided. And this was the problem at that time in the 20s, because this was the period after the First World War. So many African Americans had gone abroad and fought for democracy, equality, and justice, and died overseas in Europe and France and so on, and had come back home and expected the situation to change within the United States, to move away from sharecropping, and discrimination and lynching. But of course, that didn't happen. It was also a period of time after the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution in Russia, which was 1917, and communism, had a worldwide vision.
Right.
So there were communist socialists in the United States and among the Black community who thought that was a way for them to gain equal status within the United States. So you had communists on one side with the socialists, so to speak, and then you also had, if you will, the integrationist movement, which was present at that time, starting in about 1910, I think, with the NACP, J. Edgar Hoover and whatnot. And then you had basically the Booker T. Washington and then Marcus Garvey movement, which I think was a continuum in terms of self-help and community building, and the fact is that you had to be part of the Industrial Revolution that was taking place at that time, and you had therefore to build from the bottom up. So you had these three ideologies competing,
Right.
And this is what you might say led to competition instead of discussion. And instead of unity and trying to come to some sort of agreement to represent the community as a whole, you had these three groups, you might say, antagonistic to each other. I may be a little bit prejudiced. I don't think my dad was antagonistic to them because, when my dad came to the United States, he visited all of the so-called African leaders and tried to work with them, as well as he visited 38 states within a year to understand the conditions under which, Africans lived in America. So he was always reaching out, but he had a specific, point of view.
Right.
Okay. And as I mentioned, this was self-help and this was community building. It was independent, meaning that you had to have an economic base of your own, and you also had to have basically a socio-political base because you had an identity as African people. So this was his vision, that this was his way of functioning, and this is how he structured his organization. Now, that met a significant response from African Americans who, were tired of the injustice that they met in the South, had begun to understand democracy. A number had moved north because there was that whole movement between 1915, 1925, more than 1 million, African Americans, mostly men, moved north because of the industrialization process, because of the cotton farming thing. They used up the soil. There were diseases against cotton and so on, and they needed manufacturing in the north because so many young, white men had gone abroad to fight. So you had an urbanized population of Black people for the first time in America, as opposed to, the agriculture, as I mentioned, the sharecropping and the Jim Crow of the South. So there was this coming together of large numbers of African people, which hadn't happened in the agricultural South in that sense. They worked on farms, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. There was an amalgamation.
Exactly right. And a new ideology, the ideology of democracy, was also in the air because of the World War, because of communism. All of this was a ferment going on within the African community. And I think my dad's organization met that need in terms of, what do we do? Well, we come together among ourselves to build our communities, etc. And of course, Black people have been trying to build communities in the South, but as you know, in 1917, East St. Louis, the white folks, burnt down the town, killed people, etc. In 1920, it was the same thing, Black Wall Street, etc., etc. So, all of this was happening. It was a ferment. Okay, but the point was that I think everybody understood, shall we say, or at least African American people understood who the enemy was, who it was that was trying to brutalize them. They understood that, and I think many wanted to have an independent place within the society on an equal basis. Mm-hmm. So they were very much more attracted, I would say, to the Booker T. Washington, Marcus Garvey philosophy. So that did not sit well now with others who were, you might say, establishing themselves or had been established. And the membership of my dad's organization increased, rapidly in terms of influence. And, within a very short period of time, he came in 1916, by 1920, etc., the organization had more than 6 million members in 40 countries worldwide, and more than 80 Liberty Halls within the country, a lot of them in the South, et cetera, et cetera. So membership had been taken away from, like say, the head NAACP, and the socialists tried to capture the organization. So this was the ferment, and a discussion of ideas. And I think Justin Hanford puts it very well within the book itself, that this was a marketplace of ideas for African American people at the time, and of course for people worldwide. But if we just concentrate on the United States. So basically the opposition to Garvey, shall we say, wanted to destroy the organization, if you will, because they were losing membership. Membership meant finance because these were member-based organizations.
Right. Power and control.
Critical.
The power and control.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So they targeted Marcus Garvey in that sense. Well, I'm going to say Marcus Garvey, it was the UNIACL, but of course he was the main figure in terms of leadership of the organization. So they even created a Garvey Must Go campaign. So there was a lot of stuff that was going on. There was nativism going on because he was from the West Indies. And there was a lot of, well, like he's a foreigner kind of thing. and that reverberates today. I think in terms of getting rid of immigrants. There was a lot of self-hate expressed. My father was described as a fat, ugly black man. Whereas others were light skin or whatever it was, more approximating, shall we say, the standard of beauty of the European. My father was an African person in terms of his
Right.
face. I mean, I'm an African person.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm handsome. And an
No
African
question.
person should see me as handsome.
And
Not
I was just,
as
and
an
I was
ugly
just,
black man with protruding jaws. But
and
this is how some of the opposition portrayed him. You
And
see,
I
that
was
was
just
self-hate.
I was just teasing you at the beginning of this broadcast that I need your recipe, Dr. Garvey, because I need to stay like you when I get to that age. But what you're saying, I think, is so important, though, the internal fights,
Yeah,
the divisions that exist that
yeah,
ends up, undermining the movements for social
yeah,
change,
yeah,
and especially within the context of the Black liberation struggle.
yeah.
But how much of an irony is it, though, that even though all of that was done to undermine your father, Dr. King, when he went to Jamaica,
Mhm,
visited your father's grave and talked about the fact
mhm,
that, in his own words, to paraphrase him, that Marcus Garvey was the first Black person to give the Negro a sense of somebodyness. I mean, talk about that.
yeah.
Dr. King realizing that, and of course, Malcolm X would subsequently become a disciple of your father's world. Talk about that. And these are the two among the most preeminent African American leaders of the 20th century, Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes, 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 yes. And you can see, how the divisions in the African American community and my father's time played out in the 60s and coming forward, because it was repeated in the Nation of Islam in terms of Malcolm X. You see, and the disagreement internally allowed external forces then to further divide the organization and get rid of the leadership, because that's what happened to my dad. And maybe we'll get a chance to go through
Sure.
the non-evidence of the trial. But because of the division within the Black community, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI now could feel easy, shall we say, to subvert the Garvey organization as the lead, you might say, civil rights organization at the time. You see, so the division within the African American community allowed the major community, if you will, the majority community, the oppressor, to infiltrate the community itself and continue the division, and so infiltrate the organization. As the first FBI agents and so on, Black FBI agents were hired by J. Edgar Hoover to infiltrate the Garvey organization. That was the beginning of COINTELPRO, et cetera, et cetera. And you see it raising its head again in the 60s when the civil rights movement, came up. And you see them, peeping through keyholes in terms of Martin Luther King, trying to check on his sex life or whatever, to find a way to discredit him. And you see what happened in the Nation of Islam with Malcolm and so on. And again, you see it's in the news currently, because Malcolm's family now is suing the police department, et cetera, for millions of dollars, because they knew what was going on and they probably set up the whole thing. I mean, that's a probability. I don't have the evidence itself, but that's the charges that are being brought. So what started 100 years ago is continuing. The Black community is still, fragmented. And you're right, Martin Luther King, yes, he said that he loved to go to Jamaica. And he understood that basically the civil rights movement rested on what went on before, meaning, both Marcus Garvey and Booker T. Washington and other fighters for freedom and liberty within the United States.
Right.
And it brings us up to date. Where are we going now at this point in time? Again, I don't see the African American community as united.
And I want you to address this, though, from Malcolm X, who again was a disciple of your father, Marcus Garvey. Malcolm X, in a April 12th, 1964 speech titled "The Ballot or the Bullet," which was given in Detroit, he said, and I quote, "We're trapped, trapped, double trapped, triple trapped. Any way we go, we find that we're trapped." Does that explain for you the current state of Black America, current state of Black people?
I think that's true. Yes, and I think again that raises the problem of the discussion within the Black community and the lack of a belief system and ideology that can actually free us as a group, as a community, and even as individuals in terms of fighting for liberty and justice. And the point is, and always has been, and this was one of the things that my father brought to the table 100 years ago, the system is a global system. It's not just an American system. The head of the dragon, if you will, at this point in time, is America. Before that, it was Great Britain, and before that, it was France. These are empires that have dominated the world over time. So the United States now is still dominating the world. Okay, so it's a worldwide system of oppression of African people. There was slavery, there was colonialism. All of us now know that there's neocolonialism, where African leaders are targeted, and there's either regime change or there's assassination that's been going on. How many bases does America have within the United States? How many bases does Russia have? How many bases does China have? Who is in there? Who is trying to take all the resources out of Africa? So you see, we have a global problem still, and we have to think globally, not just locally. We can act locally, but we have to think globally, because it's only by uniting, African Americans uniting with Africans all over the globe that we'll have the strength to be able to transform our societies wherever we are. And this is still the situation at the present time. I think we can see it happening now. Many young people are migrating to Africa. I think just in Accra, Ghana, I think there were 500 or so men and women were given citizenship in Ghana. Many of them, from the United States,
including our legendary cultural icon and anti-apartheid activist Stevie Wonder as well.
Last year, I think he got his citizenship. Yes.
Right. So let me ask you, though, the teachings of Garvey here for young people, young Black men and women in this nation. How important is the teachings of Garvey, and do you see them gravitating towards that, or do you feel that there's a need for the teachings of Garvey that anchors around self-reliance and the building of Black institutions, if you will?
Absolutely, the need is still here, and it's important for the young people, because if you look and you'll see that every generation, shall we say, since Garvey, grasped at Garvey, meaning that Garvey was here in the 20s and 30s. A generation that grew up after that would be about 30 years later. So then that's when you had the 60s and the Civil Rights Movement. And then the generation after that would be in the 90s. And that's when you had, further movements in terms of the Panthers and so on.
Right.
And I think that now we have another 30 years. We're in 2024, 2025. And this generation is also rising up, because every generation needs to identify itself. Who am I? Why am I here? How do I function? How do I cope with the institutions that I see around me? And that's the situation at the present time. Unfortunately, our educational system has not been designed by us in terms of here in the United States and even in Africa and the Caribbean. We have not changed our curriculum. And as you know, what's his name, back in the 30s, told us about the miseducation of the Negro.
Carter G. Woodson.
G. Woodson told us about the miseducation of the Negro. If we're learning, not just the religion, but the same sociology, the same ethics, the same politics as the people who oppressed us and enslaved us, then our minds are going to be still enslaved by these people, and that's where we are. And my dad said we have to liberate our minds from mental slavery. The only way to do that is to have our own curriculum and teach our own young people ourselves. But as you know, that was one of the negative things about the 60s and the Civil Rights Movement. They went away from separate but equal, although it was never equal, but it was separate for a while. But then with the educational system, the kids were bused across town to go to a white school with white teachers. We no longer had black teachers who could teach a black curriculum. So we're all now learning, kids are all learning the same thing that the oppressor wants us to learn. And that's his ethics, which as you can see over the last 500 years, the ethics are quite immoral. They're unethical ethics, if you will, because they've stolen, they've raped, they've committed genocide, wars on top of wars, World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnamese War, war in Afghanistan, war in Libya, and in Syria and Lebanon. I mean, that's not a society. That's not a system. We need a different approach to life. I would say an African approach to life where you put humans first. The Ubuntu type of philosophy.
Right. The late Archbishop Desmond Tutu talked about the Ubuntu philosophy. But I want to talk about before we go take a break, I want you to talk about the lasting legacy here of your father's role in being a forerunner, if you will, to the Harlem Renaissance, the pageantry, those big marches in New York where you are. And how that remains, how you see that as a lasting chapter of Marcus Garvey's legacy.
Yeah, I think you'll see that, basically it was a time of elevating the consciousness of Black people the world over. As you know, there was later on, there was Steve Biko and the Black consciousness movement in South Africa. All of that came out of Garvey. Garvey influenced the ANC in South Africa. Nelson Mandela told us that. He grew up on Garvey. And the UNIA had branches in South Africa and were formative in the ANC when it developed, back there in the 20s. So, to be creative, you have to be conscious of yourself. You can't be conscious of somebody else. You can't have somebody else's consciousness. So the basis of the African Renaissance, of the Harlem Renaissance, I should say, is a renaissance of African consciousness. And that was what the Garvey movement was preaching. We're an African people. We're the first people in the world, so to speak. Everything began in Africa. Human beings began in Africa 200,000 years ago. And we're the first civilized people with Kemet and Kush and Ethiopia. I mean, all of that Garvey taught. And he said the black skin is not a badge of shame, but it is an indication of royalty, so to speak, or a nation of people. So he brought African consciousness to the fore in terms of one's mind, whereas before, Black people felt or thought they were subservient to the white man, and the white man had given us civilization. White man never gave us civilization. White man came, the Greeks, etc., came and saw civilization and were astounded, And if you read the early, Herodotus and the early Greek historians, they said, man, these Ethiopians, these Black people, they're fantastic. That's where the gods love to be. They're so healthy, they're so happy, they're spiritual people, and on and on and on. It's singing the praises of African people. So that's what we have to get back to. And that's, he called it African redemption. We have to redeem our civilization because he felt that history was cyclical. But we were preeminent at one point in time. We had been invaded, we had been enslaved, we're still in the midst of colonization and apartheid, but we needed to rise again. Collectively, we could rise again and rebuild our civilization.
All right, let's go. The book is titled Justice for Marcus Garvey. Look for Me in the Whirlwind, edited by the son of Marcus Garvey, of course, Dr. Julius Garvey we're talking to. Let's take a quick break.
I wish I could go to Emma's. My dad's working late. Gotta watch the boys. Long shift tomorrow. So much homework. We could get them clothes for Christmas. No, I can just make something. Is this all that's left? I know we have beans. That'll work. I don't need this one. Hungry. I'm not that hungry. We're fine. I can get them to bed. I can do my essay. No, what do do I do? Not again. Okay. I don't need to wash my hair. Turn it back on. Breathe. You're fine. And Dad will pay the water bill. We need water now. You really need groceries. We'll figure it out. Breathe. He works so hard. It's okay. We're in this together. Everything's okay. These tips will help, but only a little. Maybe I could get a second job. My dad has a second job. We don't need help. We have each other. But I'm so tired. We can do it alone. We'll figure it out. We've made it this far, but what if they could help? We're fine. We don't need this.
Hi. What's your name?
Anna.
Anna, how are you?
I'm okay.
Yeah. What brings you to the Salvation Army?
We're speaking with Dr. Julius Garvey, an eminent scientist, surgeon, a member of the Royal College of Surgeons, and one who has devoted his entire life outside of medicine and science to uplifting his father's legacy. Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the father of the 20th century Black freedom struggle. Dr. Garvey, I want to talk about the exoneration here. You've been pushing for your father to be exonerated. Bring us up to date on that. And I also, of course, have some questions relating to that as well as President Biden's recent visit to Angola in Africa. But on the exoneration question, you expected former President Barack Obama to do that, but he did not. I know you were kind of optimistic that President Biden would do it. He just pardoned his son, and there's a report now that the White House is considering a blanket pardon for White House officials and those that they feel may be targeted by Trump. And it's hard to explain how you give a blanket pardon to somebody who strongly doesn't feel that they committed any crime. So place Marcus Garvey in this equation for us and what you're asking the White House to do.
Yes, well, basically, we have been on the road to exonerate my dad since 1987, which was the centennial of his birth. And as you know, this has gone on from the time of his imprisonment. There were thousands and thousands of people who demonstrated, who wrote letters and so on. And the sentence was actually commuted by Calvin Coolidge, because the district attorney at that time went over the evidence again and said, this guy should not be in prison. So they released him, but they deported him from the United States, back to Jamaica. But anyway, in terms of, currently what's going on. So we have attempted to gain the exoneration, and in 1987 we went before the House Judiciary Committee of the Congress with Congressman Randall from New York.
Randall, yeah.
Yes, as well as John Conyers, who was head of the
Detroit Congressman John Conyers.
He was head of the committee at that point. He gave evidence and so on. And every 2 years or so, there was a resolution in the House resolution to exonerate Marcus Garvey. But all of these things got bogged down in committee, and then they never ended up coming out because the political process, it would be in committee, and then the Democrats would be in, and then
like John Conyers' bill, HR 40, reparations.
Yeah, and it goes on and on. So we continued that effort. Yvette Clarke currently now has a House resolution to exonerate Marcus Garvey, but we know that the president can give a posthumous pardon just by the stroke of the pen. He doesn't have to go to the Congress. He doesn't have to ask anybody. He might want to ask his own, judiciary, etc., to review whatever the evidence is, but he doesn't have to ask anybody to do it. So we decided to go that route with, President Obama. This was in his second term, the end of the second term, 2016. And, we had all kinds of support in terms of the NACP, the Urban League, all different organizations and individuals supporting us, Africans, Nelson Mandela's grandson, and so on and so forth. So we placed that before Obama in 2016. And he did nothing, So and then we subsequently have been approaching Biden. We have a law firm, Aiken Gump Howard, that represents us, and they've written to President Biden. They've written to Kamala Harris and so on, and we've gotten no response. The prime ministers of Jamaica over time have all approached the administration because My dad is Jamaica's first national hero, so he's honored in Jamaica, he's honored in the Caribbean, he's honored all over the world. It's only in America that he's been criminalized. You see, and this is one of the things that we need to pay attention to as African people, that, the system cannot continue to criminalize us when we stand up to fight for justice and liberty and equity on the world stage. That time is over, and that has to be recognized by us as a people, and make sure that those who would oppress us understand that we have to stand together and say, we demand justice, we demand equity, and of course we also demand reparations for the damages that have been done to us over time. So, so we are continuing the struggle. Again, there's a House resolution to exonerate Marcus Garvey, but we're continuing the application, shall we say, more on a public level at this point in time, to get President Biden in the waning weeks, shall we say, of his administration, to do a posthumous pardon for my dad, because it's not a family thing. It's about us as a people, having true freedom and justice and equality, worldwide. We cannot continue to be criminalized or when we are legitimately elected leaders worldwide. We can't be subject to regime change at the whim of those people who want to dominate the world. That time is over, and we have to stand up and make that known.
Given where your father sits at the very center of the historic cultural DNA of the 20th century Black freedom struggle, were you profoundly disappointed that former President Barack Obama did not choose to issue that historic pardon, which would have had significant and profound impact around the world?
Yes, extremely disappointed, because he should know that he was standing on the shoulders of those who had gone before. His father was from Kenya. Kenya was colonized. The British, decimated the Mau Mau who were fighting for their land. The atrocities of the British against the Mau Mau in Kenya, is enormous. The things that they did to those people, it's brutal. It's immoral. It's savage. He should know that history, and he should know that all about the enslavement of African people here in the United States. He went to college. He was not an ignoramus. He should know those things. All the way to the slavery rules here in the United States. He should know about Booker T. Washington. He should know about Marcus Garvey. He should know about Martin Luther King. He stood on those shoulders. He didn't stand on the shoulders of white people to get to be president. He had other shoulders that he was standing for. He neglected those shoulders. And that's unfortunate for him. And it's a disappointment from my perspective of what I thought he was going to be or what he could be. But he was not what he could be.
The late Harry Belafonte was an elder statesman of the civil rights movement, of course, in whose DNA is strong Jamaican roots, like your father Garvey. Harry Belafonte, an elder statesman of the civil rights movement, was very critical of President Obama while he was running for president, and throughout after the end of his tenure, Belafonte remained a constant critic of former President Barack Obama. Your take?
Well, we can go deeper.
And I know, Belafonte did it in a way that reminded us that I've paid my dues. Belafonte is one of the pillars of the modern civil rights movement. And has sacrificed a lot with his resources.
And not only that, Harry did so many positive things. He was the first matinee idol as a Black man. There was nobody before Harry who was looked up to in terms of being handsome, etc., etc. and
Right.
acceptable in that terms. And it's the way he carried himself. I
Yeah.
mean, you saw him in the movies and so on and so forth. He was nobody's boy,
Right.
and he paved the way to some extent for Sidney Poitier,
Yeah.
and others to come behind him and get those great roles, in terms of Hollywood. He brought the calypso forward, which was not a worldwide movement. That was Harry Belafonte. So he was a trailblazer, and he took all that on himself. And as you say, he was a pillar of the civil rights movement. He lent, gave money, but he was there, and he brought a lot of these Hollywood dignitaries, Marlon
Yes.
Brando and others, to support the civil rights movement. So he was an icon. He knew his history. He knew the shoulders that he stood on, and he gave back to the community.
Yeah, yeah, no, remarkable. So President Obama dropped the ball on issuing a historic pardon on Garvey. What makes you confident, though, that President Biden would? The Black president did not do it. Well, I'm just going to be honest with you, Dr. Garvey. We're speaking simple vernacular here.
Yeah.
The brother did not do it.
The brother from another mother didn't do it.
I mean, I think we all love Obama, but we do offer legitimate critique of Obama, and I know you have an affinity for him, but you're also at the same time disappointed in him, and I think the two can go at the same time. What makes you confident that Biden would do it on his way out?
Well, it's not so much a matter of confidence. It will happen. I've been on the trail, as I mentioned, since 1987.
Right. This has been
I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up. My associates won't give up. There are a lot of people who are pushing, for this worldwide, and it's only getting stronger and stronger in that sense as our own consciousness elevates. So it will happen. But hopefully Biden will see that this is something that can add to his legacy if he does this, because in some sense his legacy is being tarnished now by the posthumous pardon that he's given to his son.
Right.
This may or may not.
Pardon, not a posthumous pardon, a pardon.
Pardon. So this may, in some sense, ameliorate that negativity, if you will, in terms of using the pardon process in that way. Because his son did admit his guilt, and we can get back to the Garvey trial and so on. There was absolutely no evidence of any crime committed. It was totally bogus. First of all, it was supposed to be a group committing this mail fraud. Nobody else ended up being charged. All the other people who were shown to be innocent, if you will, are dropped from the charges. They went after Marcus Garvey. And when you look at the evidence, there was no evidence at all, because the only evidence was an empty envelope. And the person who had this empty envelope could not remember what was in the envelope. So it was an empty envelope with simply with the stamp on it of the Black Star Line. So then that's not evidence. That means that you had to suppose that there was something incriminating to Marcus Garvey within the envelope, when the person who supposedly got the envelope or got the letter couldn't remember what was in it. So there's no proof. You have to prove something. You can't assume that something in there was injurious to Marcus Garvey. We could just as easily assume that what was in there would exculpate him.
Right.
Then you had the prosecuting attorney who coached one of the witnesses to lie, to say that he worked at the UNIA and he's the one that mailed the letter. And in cross-examination, the guy didn't know who gave his pay slip every week, and he couldn't tell exactly where in the UNIA he worked. And then he had to admit that he was lying, and that it was the prosecuting attorney who coached him to lie. Now, all of this should have been thrown out by the judge. But the judge was a member of the NACP, and he should have recused himself because that was an organization at that time that was antagonistic to Marcus Garvey. You see, and was part of the Garvey Must Go campaign. So all of these things, show and indicate that it was a political trial
Right.
to destroy the movement, which was central to African American thinking at that time. It was the most populous organization. The Negro World, a weekly newspaper, had the highest circulation of all of the Crusader and all these other newspapers at that time, and it ran from 1919 to 1932. As the most popular weekly, Negro weekly in the United States and in the world.
Have you gotten any response or any signal from the Biden White House that they're looking at your request?
No, absolutely nothing. We had not only requests from our lawyer per se, but we had petitions. We got over 100,000, more than 200,000 signatures, in petitions that sent to the White House, and there was absolutely no response. That the White House is supposed to respond when it's over 100,000. Well, we got more than 100,000, but still there was no response. So, there's been a great silence there.
Yeah. President Biden was in Angola, Africa recently, where he, of course, he was there because China is there as well with minerals and so forth. Mm-hmm. And he was there, of course, to counter Chinese influence on the continent. But he appeared at the National Slavery Museum in Angola, where it was discovered that many Angolans were brought to the Americas and Brazil. Some found their way to North America and so forth. And Biden sought to talk about the legacy of slavery in the context of an atrocity that should inform what we do in the modern era. And he said it's America's original sin, something that has been, it's almost a cliche. I think we all know that slavery is America's original sin, but I'm just trying to juxtapose his visit to Africa, Angola, lifting up the crime, the atrocity, the human, the carnage of slavery that is represented in the institution of slavery, and being asked to offer a historic pardon of a man who embodies all of that struggle that Black people have gone through in the 20th century. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, America has two historic sins. One is the genocide of the Native Americans and the theft of the continent, and the other is the enslavement of African people. And they have not atoned for either. They have not looked in the mirror and faced those sins. And to speak about that in any offhand way is a disrespect and a dishonor for those who are enslaved and those who were killed, those who were worked to death, those who were raped. This is not something that should be passed over. He had reparations before the Congress. Year after year after year. John Conyers had it there. I forget what it's House Resolution 40 something.
HR 40.
HR 40 was there, years and years and years. And Biden did nothing. The Democratic Party did nothing. So it's hypocritical to talk about it in these terms without offering some redress or some real redress, indicating some change in policy. Because the policy, of the United States is still to dominate the world and dominate people wherever they are. And anyone who does not agree with the American perspective, per se, there is a country, there is regime change, et cetera, et cetera. And we see, in President Trump, when he's going to be president, talking about, the BRICS nations and so on, that if they develop their own, currency, exactly what he's going to do and what he's not going to do. Well, the day of American hegemony is over, and both Biden and Trump needs to know that it's no longer a one country where what happens in Washington rules the world. That's not true. Now, if we, it's going to be a multipolar world. It is a multipolar world, and it's going to continue to be a multipolar world. And we as African people, have to recognize that and come together to make our voices heard. Our voices can't be heard if they're disparate voices. Our voices can only be heard if they're solidified, if they're unified, and if we have, a particular agenda as we go forward in terms of our own, authenticity, as a people, and in terms of our own development of our own resources. Because again, Africa is the richest continent in the world. We have 1.5 billion people. I mean, we can develop ourselves. We don't need anybody else to help us to develop. We have all the expertise up and down. We just need to use it appropriately. And, it shouldn't require another Marcus Garvey. It should not require another Martin Luther King. It should not require, another Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah. There should be enough people there, at the African Union and in terms of CARICOM and in terms of those of us here in the United States, of understanding of world events, to come together and bring about the transformation that has to happen in terms of how the world is run. I mean, the United Nations has to be transformed. Africa has to have at least one seat in the Security Council. 1.5 billion cannot be not represented. So the systems that run the world have to be changed. The only way they can be changed if we speak with one voice. IMF, World Bank, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, all of those have to come under our purview and respond to our needs, not simply European needs or Euro-American needs.
Your point about Nelson Mandela, Dr. King, and so forth, there are people who say, well, we don't have a Martin Luther King Jr., we don't have a Nelson Mandela, we don't have a Thurgood Marshall, we don't have a Charles Hamilton Houston, we don't have a John Conyers, we don't have a Constance Baker Motley, we don't have a Shirley Chisholm. So we're left in a limbo. It's almost as if there are folk who sit waiting for a reincarnation of a Shirley Chisholm, a reincarnation of Constance Baker Motley, a reincarnation of Ella Baker, a reincarnation of Diane Nash, a reincarnation of John Lewis, a reincarnation of Bernard Lafayette, and so forth.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the problems with the mindset and the ideology that has been forced on us, that it's been accepted in terms of Europe, and it's been forced on us. And if you look, you're talking about the secular space, but if you look at the religious space, there's a misunderstanding of Christianity itself. You believe that God is somewhere out there and Jesus is somewhere out there, Jesus Christ, and you pray to someone out there. Well, you're created in God's image. God created you and God is in you. You need to look inwards. Marcus Garvey understood this. Martin Luther King understood this. And this is what made them leaders, because they understood that God's presence was in them and they were here to manifest God's presence, not to sit and wait for somebody else to do something for them. You see, so the average religious person nowadays prays to somebody to do something for them. But it's a total misunderstanding of religion. African religion was never like that, and it's not like that. If you don't pray to somebody else, you try to access the spiritual presence in yourself, and then you try to manifest that in everything that you do. So you become, you're a master of yourself and a master of your circumstances, and you contribute, therefore, to your society, your community, your tribe, or your nation, or society as a whole. So we've been taught to sort of, to sit in the pew, if you will, right, and wait, by and by for some charismatic leader or from Son of God to come down. People are still waiting for the second coming. There's not going to be any second coming.
Well,
understanding. We are the ones that we're looking for.
And I think you made a great point because I just remember Nelson Mandela at his trial, the Rivonia trial, quoted the poet saying he's the master of his fate, the master of his destiny, and so forth, before he was sent away to prison for 27 years. But let me ask you this back on the exoneration issue here. If Biden doesn't move in granting and in exonerating your father, Marcus Garvey, would you seek an exoneration from a Donald Trump White House?
I'm not going to go there at this point in time.
Okay.
We're going to keep focusing.
We'll have you back when.
Yes. We're going to keep focusing on Biden and put all our pressure there, whatever pressure we can bring to bear on President Biden.
That's Dr. Julius Garvey, not the scientist or surgeon, but the master strategist, right?
I'm being diplomatic there, Sheriff.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. You sound like a Washington lawmaker.
I'm not on K Street though.
You're not on K Street, the lobbying headquarters. I hear you. But you know, I just find it as an irony that that Biden goes to Angola, talks about slavery. He goes to the foundation of human civilization, the continent where slaves came from. Talk about and as is his last trip, perhaps as president. And I can see, you know, and it's a political masterstroke because he wants to couch his legacy also around the historic contributions of Black people. And does that with a visit to Angola, a historic visit to Angola. And the question would be, if you could make such a historic visit to Angola, why wouldn't you come back from Angola and exonerate Marcus Garvey, who represents on a global level the aspirations of the 20th century modern Black freedom struggle?
And certainly that's an injustice that he can correct himself with the stroke of a pen.
Yeah.
That's a question that he would have to answer himself, yes. But we'll put that question to him in some form.
Okay. My final question to you is the book again, and how can people get the book? I kind of want to let them know how they can get the book. And
it's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. Okay.
It's Justice for Marcus Garvey. Look for me in the whirlwind.
All right.
Amazon.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Garvey, for being here, and it was great talking with you.
And it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.